Tonight, Typhoon Kong-rey is forecast to pass by the southern coast of the Korean Peninsula at around noon Saturday. Though it has weakened, the storm is expected to bring heavy downpours and strong winds. To jointly mark the anniversary of the 2007 summit between the two Koreas, a delegation from Seoul is on a three-day trip to Pyeongyang. Aside from celebratory events, the two sides are expected to discuss various matters, including future exchanges and cooperation. October 5th is World Korean Day. At the 2018 World Korean Community Leaders Convention, President Moon Jae-in thanked expats for all they've done and asked for continued support for peace on the peninsula. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Great to have you with us. Daniel Choi. This year's 25th Typhoon Kong-rey is expected to impact Korea on Saturday. Though it has weakened from very strong middle class to medium strength middle class, residents are advised to be prepared against possible damage caused by strong wind and rain. Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Typhoon Kong-rey is forecast to pass across the southern parts of the Korean peninsula this weekend, bringing torrential rain and strong winds. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, Jeju Island will see up to 500 millimeters of rain, while the nation's eastern and southern regions will see up to 300 millimeters. Kong-rey is expected to bring rain to the rest of the country as well, but a lot less. The weather agency advises people, especially in the storm's direct path, to take precautions. As of Friday at 6 p.m., all flights to and from Jeju International Airport were cancelled, as were all ferry services between Jeju and the mainland. On Friday, Prime Minister Lee Myung-bak presided over a meeting at the country's Disaster Control Center with the Safety Ministry, the Meteorological Administration, and other relevant ministries. He called on them to prevent casualties and inspect facilities like farms and fisheries. The Safety Ministry, meanwhile, has warned people to stay tuned to emergency broadcasts and avoid spending time outdoors if possible. Currently, typhoon advisories are in effect for the waters near Jeju Island, where waves are surging onto the shore. On the south and southeastern coasts of the mainland, extra caution is needed on coastal roads, which could flood. The storm is forecast to gradually weaken by Sunday and shift course toward the northern part of Japan. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
A delegation of around 160 South Koreans is in Pyeongyang to celebrate the 11th anniversary of the October 4th Declaration, the 2000 agreement signed by the late former leader of the two Koreas, Mukwege and Kim Jong-il. On the sidelines of the event, the key participants ended up having talks as a follow-up to the recent Pyeongyang summit. Our Park Hee-jun is standing by to tell us more about that meeting. Hee-jun, do fill us in.
Daniel, we hear from the press pool that the two Koreas held a meeting that we can consider equal to high-level talks. It was led by Unification Minister Cho Myung-gyun and his North Korean counterpart Lee Sun-kwon. The meeting was focused on ways to implement the Pyeongyang Declaration signed by President Moon and Chairman Kim last month, as well as follow-up talks on that agreement. The South Korean delegation also included the Vice Minister of Health and Cultural Heritage Administrator, and from the North, the Vice Chairman of the Korean Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the country, and also the head of the North Red Cross. For about an hour, they covered a wide range of issues, including separated families and cooperation in forestry. It appears that the talks went pretty well, and there haven't been any specific agreements announced, but the two sides said they would continue to communicate through their liaison office. Now, what's left to see is whether the South Koreans will be greeted by the North Korean leader. A lot of attention was centered on a possible encounter between the sons of the leaders who signed the October 4th declaration. That's because the late former President Roh Moo-hyun's son, Roh Kwon-ho, is also in Pyeongyang. Kim didn't attend today's celebratory event, but I'll also keep an eye on that. Now, the South Korean delegates are nearing to the end of their second day in Pyeongyang and also their three-day overall schedule. Right now, they're expected to be watching the famous mass games and also an artistic performance. They will end today with a dinner banquet at 10 p.m. And tomorrow, the South Koreans will make a last stop at the country's Central Botanical Garden before heading back home in the afternoon. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Hee-jun, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. Staying with the inter-Korean activities held up north, looks like there is a lot more on the schedule for participants from both sides today. But for now, let's focus on the main event held this morning. Woo Jung-hee shows us how the 2007 summit agreement anniversary was celebrated.
Hundreds of South and North Korean participants from all walks of life filled the auditorium at the People's Culture Palace in Pyeongyang on Friday morning. The mass gathering was to celebrate the 11th anniversary of the October 4th Declaration, the agreement that came after the second ever Inter-Korean summit in 2007 by South Korea's late former President Roh Moo-hyun and then North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. North Korea ceremonial leader Kim Yong-nam said, putting the past 10 years of confrontation and threat behind them, the two Koreas should now strive to implement the latest summit agreements.
The leaders of the North and the South have left an indelible mark on history by having 3 summits and adopting the historic Panmunjom Declaration and September Joint Declaration. All Korean people in the North, the South, and overseas must strive as one to keep with these agreements.
Lee Sun-kwon, who chairs Pyongyang's reunification committee, delivered a similar message, but in a stronger tone laid out specific fields South and North Korea should work on. He pointed to economic cooperation in particular.
The two sides have worked to modernize railways and roads. We should hold groundbreaking ceremonies as soon as possible to forcefully implement the September summit agreement. And it's a pity that projects at Kaesong and Mount Kumgang are still halted. They are symbols of inter-Korean cooperation.
Seoul's Unification Minister Cho Myung-gyun briefed the audience on the developments in inter-Korean relations across various fields and stressed the two Koreas will be coordinating more closely than ever.
The points stipulated in the October 4th declaration are now being practiced through recent joint declarations, and inter-Korean relations are improving to a new high level. We have also, for the first time in history, agreed on how to achieve denuclearization. South and North Korea will make every step together to build peace on our lands.
The mass gathering lasted for an hour and a half with more addresses by representatives from the South and North. After the event, key representatives from the two Koreas, including Pyongyang's nominal head of state Kim Yong-nam and Seoul's Unification Minister Cho Myung-gyun, met separately once again to reaffirm their vow towards achieving peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. Woo Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., the Donald Trump administration continues to slap sanctions on anyone dealing illegally with North Korea. Washington is targeting a Turkish company and several individuals for their alleged violation of UN measures against the regime. Incheon gets us up to speed with the developments.
The U.S. Treasury Department said on Thursday that it's targeting Turkish company Siyah Falcon International Group for attempting to trade in weapons and luxury goods with North Korea in breach of UN sanctions against the North. Also sanctioned are the firm's CEO and general manager, both Turkish nationals, and a North Korean diplomat. According to the Treasury, Lee Sung-eun, the economic and commercial counselor at the North Korean embassy in Mongolia, negotiated trade deals involving weapons and luxury goods with Siyah Falcon officials in Turkey earlier this year. These sanctions freeze any property or interest of the targeted entity and individuals within the U.S. and bans Americans from doing business with them. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the international community must not stand idly by as UN sanctions are being circumvented, adding the U.S. is deeply committed to the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea and will continue to enforce and implement sanctions until that time. South Korea's foreign ministry said Friday it sees the move as Washington stands that the sanctions must be enforced alongside dialogue in order to achieve the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This comes less than a month after the U.S. imposed new sanctions on a Chinese and a Russian firm for allegedly helping the North send its IT workers abroad. The announcement also comes ahead of U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's 4th visit to Pyongyang, where he's set to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Sunday to discuss efforts to dismantle the regime's nuclear weapons program and set up a second summit with President Donald Trump. Watchers say Washington's latest move shows its determination to fully enforce sanctions, but is also likely to escalate tensions between the two sides. 이지원, Arirang News.
A special ceremony was held to mark World Korean Day, a day to commemorate the 7.4 million ethnic Koreans around the world. President Moon Jae-in was at the event. He stepped up to the podium and expressed gratitude toward them while asking for continued support in efforts to bring peace on the peninsula. Hwang Ho-jun brings us the highlights from his speech.
The success and peaceful hosting of the Pyeongyang Winter Olympics and a new era of peace on the Korean peninsula. According to President Moon, Korean expats around the world played a major part in making those possible.
한반도의 평화의 문을 연 것은 우리 국민과 재외동포 여러분의 하나된 열망이었습니다.
And President Moon said he's now dreaming of bigger things.
남북이 항구적인 평화 속에서 하나가 되는 꿈. 여러분과 여러분의 자녀들이 자동차와 기차로 고국에 방문하는 꿈. 한반도를 넘어 동북아와 전 세계에서 함께 번영하는 꿈. 여러분과 함께 꼭 이뤄내고 싶은 꿈입니다.
His remarks came during the 12th World Korean Day and the 2018 World Korean Community Leaders Convention held on Friday morning. About 550 people were in attendance, including leaders of some 400 overseas Korean communities. The South Korean leader first expressed his gratitude and pride for Koreans overseas, asserting the history of the Republic of Korea and the lives of Koreans abroad are woven together. He then reminded his audience that Seoul and Pyongyang have decided to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the March 1st Independence Movement Day next year, insisting it will be a God-sent opportunity for South and North Koreans to restore a sense of kinship. President Moon said he hopes the celebration will become a national festival to be celebrated by the millions of ethnic Koreans across the world. He called for overseas Korean community leaders to take the lead. President Moon also pledged to do more to support Korean expats. He stressed how his administration has greatly increased the government budget to protect the safety of overseas Koreans. He also pledged to expand educational support for the younger generation abroad in areas including Korean culture, history, and language to help them remember their heritage. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Japan has decided not to participate in a major naval event held in South Korea's Jeju Island. The nation's Navy has been notified by Tokyo that it cannot participate in the International Fleet Review unless Seoul accepts the rising sun flag on Japan's warship, as it is required by domestic law to hoist the flag. South Korea's Navy said in its statement that it had closely communicated with Japan, asking it to accept the host nation Korea's request to fly Japan's national flag instead of the rising sun flag during the naval review, as the latter is a symbol of Japan's wartime aggression to the South Korean people. However, since Tokyo is adamant in its position, Seoul also decided it cannot accept Japan's stance on the controversial flag. Tokyo will instead send a delegation to the Naval Events Symposium next week. The 2018 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Congolese gynecologist Denis Mukwege and Yazidi human rights activist Nadia Murad for their extraordinary efforts to end sexual violence and armed conflicts. The Norwegian Nobel Committee said on Friday that it selected Mukwege and Murad for helping bring attention and raise awareness of how women, who constitute half of the population in most communities, actually are used as a weapon of war and that they need protection. Mukwege has treated thousands of women suffering from complicated injuries caused by gang rape and from his hospital near the Rwandan border performed life-saving surgeries on women who fell victim to soldiers of armed rebels. Murad, herself a victim of war crimes, was recognized for her refusal to stay silent and has shown enormous courage in recounting her own suffering from Islamic State militants and speaking up on behalf of other victims. The Norwegian Nobel Committee received nominations for 216 individuals and 115 organizations to be selected as the Nobel Peace Prize laureate this year. Samsung and LG Electronics announced their operating profits for the third quarter of the year. The nation's biggest tech giant smashed its record for the highest profit in a single quarter. Hong Yu breaks down the digits for us.
Samsung Electronics has made a record profit for this year's third quarter. On Friday, it announced that it has made more than $50 billion of operating profits, surpassing its previous quarterly record of around $13 billion, set in the first quarter of this year. The third quarter operating profits are 20.4% higher than over the same period last year, and up by almost 18% from the figures for the second quarter of 2018. The reported profit is seen as an earnings surprise that is well above analyst expectations. It largely came from strong semiconductor sales, but some analysts expect a drop in profits in the future.
At this point, I think they can expect a similar good outcome for the fourth quarter. But the unit price of semiconductors is expected to fall as time goes on, and Chinese companies also have competitive technology along with competitive prices. So I expect a trend where profits from semiconductors slowly decrease.
On the same day, LG Electronics also announced its third quarter operating profit. The firm made about $659 million over the past 3 months. The third quarter profits are 44.4% higher than for the same period last year, but are down by 3.3% from the figures for the second quarter of 2018. Analysts did not expect such a decrease, having predicted LG Electronics to make around $690 million of operating profits. The weak exchange rates of emerging economies, including Turkey, and continued slump in the smartphone business were cited as the factors behind the fall compared to the previous quarter. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Staying here in the nation, the impact of this year's extremely hot and wet summer could be felt at local grocery stores. South Korea's consumer prices in September rose at the fastest pace in 12 months, mainly due to spiking vegetable prices. Ko Ryun-hee help us look beyond the concerning numbers.
South Korea's consumer prices last month spiked by their fastest pace in a year on a sharp rise of agricultural goods prices. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, consumer prices went up 1.9% last month from a year earlier. This is the highest on-year growth since September last year. Prices remained in the 1% growth range for the 12th month in a row, below the central bank's target of 2%. The agency said soaring agricultural goods prices caused a hike. Vegetable prices rose by a whopping 12.4% on-year, due to the record heat wave and heavy rainfall this summer. In August, temperatures in Seoul sizzled at a 111-year high, and the prolonged intense heat wave led to supply shortages. Prices of petroleum products rose by 10.7% on-year, due to rising international oil prices. Prices of gasoline and diesel have been increasing in South Korea for 13 weeks in a row. Gasoline prices hit a record high for the year in September, at more than $1.46 a liter. Prices of electricity, water, and gas dropped 1.8%. The price cut is less than last month's data because the government's revision to the progressive electricity billing rates only took effect until August. Service prices gained 1.4%. Inflation, excluding food and energy items, was up 1% on-year. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Lee Myung-bak, a former South Korean president, is sentenced to 15 years in prison. The Seoul Central District Court confirmed the ex-conservative leader is the real owner of DAS, a controversial auto parts company, and found him guilty of multiple corruption charges. Cha Sang-mi has the latest.
A Seoul court has convicted former President Lee Myung-bak on 7 charges, including bribery, embezzlement, and abuse of power. The judge sentenced him on Friday to 15 years behind bars. He also has to pay a fine of over $11 million and forfeit more than $7 million. Prosecutors had asked for a 20-year sentence and a fine of over $13 million. Seoul Central District Court ruled that Lee was the real owner of DAS, an auto parts maker that he claimed belonged to his brother and which was used for embezzlement. The 76-year-old was also convicted of accepting some $13 million in bribes from the nation's biggest companies and state agencies, including tech giant Samsung Electronics and the National Intelligence Service. The court found Lee had received over $5 million from Samsung in the form of legal fees on his behalf for a lawsuit in the U.S. The verdict said the retainer was paid in exchange for a presidential pardon for Samsung chairman Lee, who was under investigation for tax evasion. In her verdict, the judge said the defendant had embezzled some $22 million as de facto owner of DAS and that he let down not just his supporters, but the entire country. The verdict was broadcast live, but Lee wasn't there because of his poor health, according to his lawyers, and in protest against the decision to broadcast the verdict. The sentencing comes nearly 6 months after the former president was indicted in April on 16 corruption charges. Lee Myung-bak served as president from 2008 to 2013 and has been held in a detention center since March. This makes Lee the fourth former South Korean president to be criminally convicted and imprisoned after his successor Park Geun-hye, who is serving 25 years for a separate power abuse scandal that led to her ouster in early 2017. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Despite the government's drive to raise minimum wage, foreign workers in Korea are earning slightly less than that on average. Conditions are even more challenging for female foreign workers who receive even smaller paychecks. Lee Min-sun has the full story.
Foreign workers in Korea make less than $2,000 a month, according to a recent survey. On Friday, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea released the result of survey conducted between April and August this year. About 1,500 migrant workers participated in the survey. The results showed that foreign workers worked 54.4 hours on average per week, which is a couple more hours than the legal maximum of 52 hours per week. With an average monthly salary of about $1,900, those working in the construction sector earn the most, while those in the agricultural and fishery industries earn the least. The overall average monthly wage stood at $1,770, which is some $230 less than the average monthly income based on the country's minimum wage. Male and female workers were found to have a similar total of working hours per week, but men were found to receive $265 more than their female counterparts.
Foreign workers generally have low-income jobs, but they put up with poor labor conditions in order to earn money. As such, some employers prefer hiring foreigners because they wouldn't demand a higher income.
The survey also found that many of these foreign workers had poor housing conditions. 55% of the respondents lived in temporary accommodation or living spaces operating within the working space. The human rights watchdog and related institutes are planning to raise awareness of the situation of foreign workers in Korea and are putting efforts together to improve their labor conditions in the country. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea held anti-terrorism drills aimed at enhancing response capabilities against terror attacks taking place in the country's territorial waters. According to the National Counter-terrorism Center, the exercise staged on Friday at Gyeongin Port at Incheon largely consisted of two parts: handling an attack on a cruise ship and one at a passenger terminal. On the cruise ship scenario, the drill comprised minimizing the threat of a mass shooting and explosive by terrorists and tackling potential fires. Approximately 370 officers from the Counter-terrorism Agency, the National Intelligence Service, and other government branches took part in the exercise. Time to turn to Michelle Bak at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, what's the latest on Typhoon Kong-rey?
Daniel, Typhoon Kong-rey is passing through waters off the coast of Jeju Island, and as such, typhoon alerts have been issued for the island and the South Sea coast. Now, since yesterday, the typhoon has been moving more vertically to the north, and it's expected to arrive near Busan 6 hours faster than expected. And the typhoon's influence on the peninsula will reach its peak from later tonight until tomorrow afternoon. So stay updated on the forecast as often as possible and take all necessary precautions. Now, along with some strong winds, the central region will receive the least amount of rain, between 30 to 80 millimeters of precipitation, while the coastal regions and Jeju Island are expected to get as much as 250 millimeters of rain. And the morning lows in Seoul will be warmer than the seasonal average, waking up to 17 degrees Celsius, while most of the southern regions will start the day at 21 degrees. But the mercury won't make it up too high into the day, as Seoul's temperature rises only to 21 degrees in the afternoon, while Daegu and Busan and Jeju peaks up to 24 degrees. Now, once the typhoon passes, the sky will turn brighter from Sunday through next week. I'll leave you with weather conditions around the world.
These are the stories we could pack into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for watching. Here's wishing you a relaxing and safe weekend.